Let's talk about NSPM-7. You might have heard of it, and if you haven't, then this is very important information for you because honestly, this is probably one of the most frightening things this administration has done. And the mainstream media is not talking about it much at all. So that's why we're covering it here. NSPM-7 is a presidential directive that was put out by the Trump administration shortly following Charlie Kirk's assassination. Ken Klippenstein, a journalist, received a leaked memo directing the departments of the administration in how to enact this directive. So let's hear from Ken. What is NSPM-7, what it does, and why it's such a frightening revelation?
Why don't you tell us how you got a hold of this memo?
Well, it was provided to me by somebody who I can't really say much more than had access to it. And what it was an implementation order for that NSPM-7 directive from President Trump, which essentially targets anyone who isn't MAGA. At first, I looked at it and thought, oh, this is targeting the left. But then you see these so-called indicators of terrorism, things like anti-Christian sentiment, anti-American sentiment. And I realized that's not just the left. That's anyone who isn't a Trump supporter.
So explain the significance of this, Ken Klippenstein.
It essentially takes NSPM-7, which advances the view that the major threat of terrorism is coming from these, anti-Trump sentiments, and it puts it into effect. It uses tools available to the federal government and federal law enforcement in particular. For example, it directs the FBI to go through its past half decade or so of intelligence on Antifa and on some of these other groups I've been talking about, and tells them to make criminal cases around those and to circulate intelligence about it. And part of that intelligence production effort involves soliciting tips from the public, getting people to narc on their fellow citizens who are evincing this anti-Trump sentiment. So in one case, it tells the FBI to upgrade and kind of supercharge its tip system so that they can get this flow of information coming in from informants all over the country, reporting on threats like these. I would say it's not a person so much as an incident, which was the murder of Charlie Kirk, as national security officials described to me. Shortly after the murder, the very next day, there was a war room convened by the White House. And I think kind of unofficially taking point on this was President Trump's Homeland Security advisor, Stephen Miller. And he kind of orchestrated, along with all these other national security appointees, how are we going to respond to this? And the decision was made that we would make anti-Trump sentiment tantamount to this terrorist threat, and we were going to prosecute it as such. So I guess I would say, if I was to point to one single person, I would say Stephen Miller. But this is really an attitude held by a lot of people in the administration, which I think is genuine fear in the wake of that shooting, that something like that might happen to them. And so we have to create a response. And what that is essentially the same sort of response to 9/11. But in this case, it's directed at Americans.
Ken, is money involved with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So it directs the Treasury Department to audit taxes and to try to find, the administration seems convinced that there's some shadowy foreign group or financiers for a lot of the sentiments I was describing before, and Antifa in particular. And so it authorizes them to go through nonprofits' taxes, and to try to find evidence of something which there's no public evidence exists.
But is there a reward being offered, like if someone calls an FBI tip line?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another thing that this implementation order directs. It provides for a funding system to reward people that provide these tips that I was described before. It's basically a bounty system for anti-Trump thought and reporting on it.
And it goes back retroactively 5 years?
Yeah, the FBI right now, pursuant to this order, is digging through all of its intelligence to find whatever they can going back to the Biden administration, that can be used to help make these cases.
Trump's whole political strategy is to create an enemy. When he announced his candidacy for president in 2015, the Mexicans were the enemy. He explicitly called them out and said, these people are bringing their drugs, they're rapists, etc. And some are good people, etc., etc., etc. This has been a theme of Trump's presidency going back a decade, including his campaign of last year, which is there's an enemy. If it's not immigrants, it's other countries. If it's not other countries, it's the left. If it's not the left, it's Democrats. If it's not Democrats, it's rhinos. There's always an enemy to Trump's political game, and it's part of what's been splitting this country in half for the past decade. This directive is just the latest, most egregious example of that strategy being employed. And ironically, it's targeting a group called Antifa, which, doesn't quite exist as an organization or membership, or, they can't say where the headquarters are because there are none. It's an ideology. It's an idea of anti-fascism. That's the irony here. And, the Trump administration is making this big deal out of, we're going to come after the anti-fascists. Well, I remember back when America was anti-fascist, when America won World War II and defeat Nazi Germany. That was probably the peak of anti-fascism in the world. So it's quite ironic that Antifa is the target of this memorandum explicitly. But as Ken Klippenstein said, it's not just the left. It's not just this made-up group. It's anyone outside of MAGA. If you're anti-Christian, you're a target. If you're anti-American, whatever that means, leave it up to interpretation. If you're anti-capitalist, so if you come up with like other ideas, we could like structure the economy or come up with some socialized programs, maybe like come up with better ideas for giving more people access to healthcare. Are you anti-capitalist? Like, this whole thing is outrageous. It's absurd. It's insane. It's egregious. It's an overreach. It's absolutely bonkers. And the mainstream media is not talking about it as nearly as much as they should be. Mike, what do you think of all this stuff that we've been learning about NSPM-7?
I think it's dangerous. That's the one word that I would use to describe it. It is very broad language, sweeping language. Like you were saying, how do you define anti-Americanism? If you burn a flag, are you anti-American or are you a patriot who's protesting? If you're pro-Confederate statue, are you anti-American because that was sedition and conspiracy against the United States, or are you a patriot who's celebrating your heritage? It's very broad. And again, being regarding the anti-Christian language, it's like, so does that mean you can't be a Muslim in the United States anymore? You can't be, a Hindu, a Buddhist, you can't have differing religious beliefs. And then even then, when you get into Christianity, there's like thousands of denominations. So what happens if you're, Presbyterian versus Catholic versus this or that? Where does the line get drawn exactly? And to simply say that, well, Christians in general, no matter which denomination they are, they're all protected, but we're only going to protect Christians, makes it again clear that this administration is not looking out for every American. They're looking out for their base, and they're riling their base up, and then they're making it completely us versus them. And the dangerous part of this is that the leading structure of it all is from the state. This isn't just like some talking head who's, influencing people like a Ben Shapiro or Tucker Carlson or something. This is the state coming after you saying, hey, if you do these things, we are now going to label you as a domestic terrorist. And one of the things they included in that list of indicators, by the way, is civil disobedience. So if you're being violent against the government, that's one thing. But even if you're civilly disobeying, which is just protesting, now you can be labeled as a domestic terrorist simply for protesting, especially if it's organized, meaning that like everybody has signs printed out in advance and whatnot. Like those are good ways to be labeled as a domestic terrorist now, which is crazy because the anti-American stuff, the anti-capitalist stuff, the anti-Christian stuff, and now also this, civil disobedience stuff, like all of those are protected and enshrined by the First Amendment. You can do all of those things, but this directive is pretty much going completely against that. And it's also funny to me that it mentions not, if you support overthrowing the United States government, now you could be a domestic terrorist. But the problem is, like, how do you explain January 6th then? Is that not thousands of people who were organized? Maybe not directly, they were all inside the same group, but there were multiple groups identified in there. You had the Proud Boys, you had the Oath Keepers, so why are they not being treated as domestic terrorists? Instead, they're treated as patriots, they're heralded as heroes, and it's, the double standard has never been more blatant.
Yeah. Again, the amazing irony of this whole thing is that they're claiming that the left or people on the left end of the spectrum or Democrats or whatever are calling them, the administration, fascists. This is the claim. But instead of showing how they're not aligned with fascist tendencies and doing fascistic things, they're doing things like NSPM-7, which seems to be exactly what a fascistic regime would do, which is clamp down on dissent, which is clamp down on people outside of the current ruling ideology at the time. I mean, the irony gets so lost on here. It's like, calling out something for what it seems to be, and then that thing doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on the exact tendencies that are causing this whole question in the first place. It's just, that to me is the big irony of this whole entire thing. And I don't know, what's the legal basis of all of this stuff? I mean, it's a presidential directive, so it went out to all the heads of all the major, the secretary of DHS, et cetera, et cetera. So how is this going to be enforced? I mean, of course, we're supposed to be a country of laws and order and courts. Like, if they have all of this directive and intelligence, and the FBI is supposedly going back and doing investigations, what is the mechanism here for enforcement? That's the part that I don't understand. They haven't addressed. I don't think it's even feasible. But maybe part of this is like what Klippenstein was saying, was it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction similar to post 9/11. There's some fear there of like, they don't want to be on the receiving end of what happened to Charlie Kirk, and nobody does, God forbid. So was this just a knee-jerk reaction? Is this just kind of like a kind of a threat, kind of like a scare tactic for like, hey, you better fall in line or you're going to be targeted? It remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would go so far as to say that it was simply a knee-jerk reaction. It's possible, but I think my personal take is that this administration has wanted to consolidate power. They've wanted to otherize their enemies and to target enemies and go after enemies. And Trump has been very clear about that before he was even reelected. So I don't think it's so much, that, hey, this just so happened to coincide. I think it's more so that they realize, hey, we have an opportunity here. Let's move on it. Let's seize it. And this whole thing about the legality of it, like, I'm no legal expert, obviously, but I have no idea. I suspect it's going to be similar to what they're trying to do in regards to this mass deportation stuff, where they're going to just do what they want. And then judges are going to be like, hey, you can't do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do this. And we'll see how that goes, because now, in theory, if a judge blocks the government while they do this, you could argue that they're trying to overthrow the United States government, or that they're being anti-American. So like the judge could easily be labeled a terrorist as well. This is a very slippery slope situation. And I think that when you were talking about the irony being lost as well, Emmanuel, I think that's a great point, because when you look at, like, they're setting up literal snitch hotlines straight to the FBI and things like that, where they want fellow Americans to snitch on their neighbors, to snitch on their families, and say, "Oh, my family member, I think they may be part of Antifa or something because they don't like the government, or they have kind of anti-Christian values or viewpoints or whatever." And what point in history has that behavior ever worked out well? I think about, obviously, Nazi Germany with the Gestapo, and how they had a lot of their information and busts came through tips, and how they would receive tips on, like, even who's hiding Jews in their houses and stuff like that. Like, this stuff never really worked out well. And there's already a history of this snitch mentality in the Trump administration, because when Doge came in, they were literally encouraging employees to snitch out fellow employees and coworkers who were trying to keep DEI policies in place after the administration has declared, like, we're not doing DEI anymore. So if you still tried to administer some level of equality, they would come after you and you would lose your job and things like that. But now it's not just you're going to lose your job. This is, you're going to be labeled a terrorist and you'll be treated as such, which hopefully just means going to jail, but it could potentially mean being sent to Gitmo or somewhere like that is a no man's land as well, because that's how we've treated terrorists here too.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but think that the main obstacle from a legal perspective that they're going to run into is the First Amendment. I mean, that is enshrined in our Constitution. It's literally the First Amendment that we made to the Constitution because we realized how important that was. I don't know, man. This is, coming off the heels of the Charlie Kirk assassination, if that was really the catalyst for this, let's take a look at what happened there. I mean, Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin was the child of MAGA Republican Trump supporters. I mean, he was their kid. He was, radicalized online. Apparently, I guess he visited the wrong kind of subreddits or whatever. However, he got radicalized. But the point of the matter is, this is like the product of America. It's an open society where we get to read and explore our own ideas and stuff. But what the assassin did was not right and not legal. And so he's facing the consequences for that. It seems like what they're trying to do here is sort of minority report the premonition of, if we think that you're going to commit a crime, we want to know and we want to come after you. And as we've seen in movies and in fiction, that's not a good idea to have thought crimes. And Ken Klippenstein kind of alluded to this as well, where he was like, they're basically targeting anyone outside of MAGA that doesn't have Trump-like thought. And that's just a scary thing.
Exactly. And they seem to be saying that they're so afraid of violence from the left. But let's not forget that the DOJ also removed the study that came out before the Charlie Kirk shooting that proved that the vast majority of political violence that has ever happened in this country, going back, I think it's 30 years, it goes back to like the early 90s, the vast majority, I think it was like over 70%, is committed by right-wing extremists. So this idea that the left wing is out here just unhinged and they're going to go out and kill everybody, it's like, you see that happen far more from the right than you do from the left. But by hiding that report and only talking about Charlie Kirk's assassin and doing everything they can, even though I've even heard that he has like Groyper ties, which is a far right Nick Fuentes alignment. They're doing everything that they can to paint the left as the villains and to create this enemy that you were talking about earlier. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens going forward, but it's very interesting to me that the right is mostly silent about this, or they're even in support of it, because I don't think most of them know what NPSM-7 is, but I do think that if they heard about it, they'd be like, oh, hell yeah, this is great. Like, we're cracking down on these thugs. And it's like, but I thought you guys are the First Amendment guys. And in particular, you're also the Second Amendment guys. But under this thing, if you're branded a terrorist, now you're a terrorist with a weapon. it escalates quickly. And I'm just surprised that the right is not joining the left and being like, hey, we should not do this. Because if we vilify half of the country, even if you're a Republican and you agree with this now, if a Democrat gets in power and they use this same procedure against the right, then what are you going to do?